Welcome, everyone. We hope that you're having a blessed morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are geographically located. Um, and thank you for taking the time to be with us today. If you are here, that means you are interested to learning more about the placement exchange, but more specifically, student affairs. And so before we dive in, we'll do introductions. My name is Christian Raphael Suero, and I serve as the co-chair for candidate development with this year's the placement exchange committee. And I'll pass it to my colleague and co-partner.
Hello, everyone. My name is Karess Gillespie. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the co-chair of the Candidate Development Committee. We are going to be having some of our other TPE committee colleagues sharing their journey in careers and student affairs with you all. I'll have the other panelists introduce themselves to you today. So I'll throw it over to Ashley, who's the first person I see in my Zoom screen.
Hi everyone, I am Ashley Owens. I am a area coordinator at the University of Richmond, but I am also serving on the TPE Planning Committee as the co-chair for Ambassadors and Volunteerism. And I will popcorn to Amanda.
Hi, my name is Amanda Dickinson Beirne. You can call me Amanda. I work with employers as part of the TPE Planning Committee. And then we'll go to Kirby.
Hello, everyone. My name is Kirby R. Gibson. I use she, her pronouns, and I serve as the Assistant Director of Residence Education at Michigan State University, and also serve as the chair for the TPE Planning Committee. So I have the pleasure of leading and getting to work with this fantastic group of individuals.
So for our conversation today, we have some questions just to kick off the conversation today. So our theme is kind of careers and student career. It's a career panel. It was student affairs all along. So really talking about just our various journeys. But we will have some time for you all to ask questions. So feel free to put those in the chat. And we can kind of ask those as we are kind of going through our conversation. But to kind of my colleagues, wanting to kick off our conversation of like, how did you start in student affairs or higher education? Kind of what was that motivation or kind of kickstart for you all?
I guess I'll start. I think like many folks kind of stumble into student affairs without knowing that you truly are in it. And so I would say that really actually was my first year in undergrad, where I got involved as with our like equivalent of a hall government, hall council, RHA, depends on where you're at. And then also being able to be a part of a learning community for women in science and engineering. And so in that kind of involvement, like just continued on throughout my career, whether it was through continuing to be involved in the residence halls as a peer mentor, eventually for that learning community, also being involved in various mentoring programs on campus for various affinity and constituent groups. And then eventually became, so I went to UW-Madison for undergrad, and eventually became a house fellow. That's what we call our resident assistant advisors, et cetera, there. And was just all about it. But I also was that student who I was excelling in the extracurriculars and was not necessarily doing what I needed to do academically in the classroom. And so my supervisor at the time had a conversation with me because they knew I was in a space of trying to navigate like the academic piece and ensuring that I, actually graduate, but then also was seeing that there was like a lot of interest and just excitement around the work that I was doing as a house fellow. And so pretty much was like, have you heard of student affairs? This is something that you could potentially consider as a career path, et cetera, et cetera. But I was still believing that I was going to be an engineer. Hands down, I was going to be an engineer, work for industry in Japan. Like that was the goal. That was the plan. And was just kind of like, oh, okay, that's cute. And my supervisor pretty much ended that conversation like, you're going to have my job one day. And I didn't believe him at all. I was like, you don't know what you're talking about. Like, I'm going to be this engineer and work for industry in Japan. Fast forward a year. I then reached out to my supervisor, who ended up moving like to another institution, and called to say, all right, so how am I going to get this job that you say that I'm going to have? And so at that point, I realized that engineering really wasn't the path that I wanted to take, and was more so trying to fulfill that that dream or that goal for the sake of others. And really at that moment kind of took control of like my interests, my life, and thinking about how I wanted to move forward and make impact. And so that was kind of like the further beginnings of that, and how I eventually got involved with the NASPA Undergraduate Fellows Program, which is a program through NASPA or NUF that introduces underrepresented students to the field. And so that was kind of the humble beginnings, and I'll leave it at that.
I think I'll share next. Strange enough for me, I grew up in student affairs. So my dad has worked in TRIO/EOP programs my entire life. And I will say it wasn't until I was in college when I realized exactly what he was doing. And I think I went to college to be a pediatrician. As we all know, that did not work out like that. I was in classes. This is not for me. I started taking some sociology classes and got really intrigued by just thinking about us as humans and us as people. And then my focus transitioned into looking at students. And I think it was one day I attended something, honestly, just like this, but it was less a speed dating for those who are looking to go into this field. And I ended up being paired with my dad's supervisee, and we were chatting through all the things. And the first thing he said to me is, I'm surprised you didn't realize this sooner. Why did you not know that you were bound to be just like your father, and the apple did not fall too far from the tree? So I think that just being able to understand everything started to piece together, all the puzzle pieces, going to the conferences with him and just understanding how much of a passion he had for students just like me. And it felt natural after that. So everything that fell in line, and this is where I definitely want to stay.
I can jump in. It's so wonderful to hear Ashley's story specifically, right, of being kind of tracked into that and seeing, that you can go into that. My story is a little bit different. So I went to undergrad and I have a BFA in film, and I worked in film and television. And for about 6 years, I was an RA, and I really loved being an RA, right? It's that circuitous path. And sometimes I liked being an RA more than I liked what I was doing in school, right? It's similar to Kirby to some extent. But I said, no, this is what I'm doing. And I like the organization piece. I like figuring it all out and the logistics. And so I was on sort of the production coordination side of things. And so in some ways, right, putting out small fires and then translating that experience to student affairs. So worked in film and television and thought, oh, I don't think I want to do this anymore. And I often tell that, right, to grads that are in higher ed programs or new and emerging professionals, that you can change your path, right? I tell that to undergrads too regularly, that my time in film was so valuable and allowed me to know that this is the career path that I want to continue to stay in. I did something else. I made a change, but didn't know how to break into student affairs, right? Without a master's degree, that can be really, really difficult for a variety of reasons that are pretty challenging at times. And so I actually moved to Portland, Maine from Los Angeles. And I said, well, where's an entry point? And folks at a community college took a chance on me and welcomed me into a student affairs space. And that was my entry point into student affairs, was working with a community college, and fell in love with it, but was so thankful that an opportunity was afforded to me without a master's degree. I worked for probably 4 years professionally without a master's degree, and then realized that I needed to get that, not only for for all the reasons that are in place, unfortunately or fortunately, depending on how you view that, can be problematic, but also really important, right, to better understand what it means to serve students, and the theory and the development behind it, and then went back and got a master's degree, and then went right back into working in student affairs, and have been in student affairs since 2007. So right now I work at Georgetown University and do non-clinical case management, but started in student affairs and residence life for many, many years.
Thank you all for sharing those very interesting and different pathways. And so as you think about kind of the different like journeys you've had and ups and downs that we all have, you know, in the work that we do, what has surprised you most kind of in like the work that you've done kind of in the various positions you may have had? Anyone can take this first.
I'm very surprised I am in residence life. I will say, when I first went to grad school, I remember very specifically interview days. I had my pick, I had to make my rankings. I ranked residence life 10 out of 10. Please do not put me in residence life. Later to find out, I was definitely selected one of the first folks to go into an apartment, upper class hall as an RD, and it turned my life upside down. I think my experience was, I wasn't that excited about what I was doing, and then I attended CHO, which is the Southeast Atlantic Housing Officials Region for Kauai, and I was like, there are about 800 people in this room that really love residence life. Maybe I'm being too harsh on this field. Maybe I'm just not giving it a good go. Maybe I'm having a different experience, but I attended all of those sessions and I left there jaw dropped, mouth wide open, like, wow, there's so much more to this field. There's so much work that we could do, and we have such a huge platform. Like, I have access to majority of the students that live on campus, and I can make such a difference or an impact on these people's lives through just where they live. It totally flipped the entire field upside down for me. And I think I was so surprised to find that out. And I'm still surprised to be learning so much, so deep into, I guess, my career. And I think that these students change every year, and I'm always surprised by them and always surprised by myself, and being able to adapt and grow with them has been really special.
I think to a point Amanda brought up earlier around kind of like, it's okay to change your path, right? No matter kind of at what point you're at. And so like when I made the decision of pursuing a career in student affairs, it was definitely pursuing I set the goal for myself to be a vice president of student affairs, like that being the pinnacle of what I wanted to achieve after getting a master's degree and doing work and all of that. And I think the thing that has been surprising to me has been the shift and the constant kind of transition from that original goal that I had set for myself. And so it was, and being very open and welcoming of that, right? I think oftentimes when we have conversations like this, or we talk about careers in student affairs, like we try to paint the path into student affairs as only one path, which is very problematic and doesn't truly speak to the breadth that this field, that exists within this field, and that there is, that everybody ain't meant to be in some sort of senior admin folks. Hell, there are people in senior admin positions that probably shouldn't be in those positions, right? And so how do you take the time to be reflective on what your interests are, again, the impact that you want to have, and know that your impact is not measured by the positionality that you hold, right? I do want to name that, like, with positionality, there is privilege, right? So I'm not dismissing that. And like, my impact as an assistant director is not less than or more than the impact that someone may be doing in a role that is a few pay grades higher than mine, right? And so really, I think the kind of surprising or awakening moments that I've had so far within my career is knowing that I can dictate the impact that I want to have, and it's not tied to specific like position type.
I want to jump into this question because I had a revelation around this question. So I think the thing that has surprised me most, and I think everyone says this, every day is not the same. But I would say your position is not stagnant in kind of student affairs. And so I've learned that no matter the case, and even more so in this pandemic, understaffing happens. There will never be complete staffing anywhere. So I've learned that my job will never just be what the title is. And so I cannot recall in the 3 years I've had a position as an assistant director in student living, just being an assistant director in student living. Even before the pandemic, I've had to take on different aspects of work in my department because of staffing issues or just changes in my university. And so being just adaptable is one of the biggest skills or flex that I think I've had to grow in being in student affairs or higher education, because it's always ever growing. So they sell you, oh, you're going to be in this role, but that line that says other duties as assigned should be bolded, because it's always going to change or develop based on the environment that you're in. And so I think that to me was the most surprising, because I'm like, well, you give me a job description and you tell me these are the tasks, but I can't tell you, at least in the last 5-6 years, I don't know when I've actually matched with my job description. And so being open to that adaptability, even more so as we kind of launch into the unknown of this pandemic-ish year. And so I think and in that, learning how to advocate for the boundaries that I need and advocate for the opportunities that I'm seeking in my role was something that I had to quickly understand was something that was needed because of that flexibility in the job description based on your title and your status as hourly versus exempt. And so knowing that that is the most surprising thing in a role comparatively to any other field or career, I think, and just talking to some of my friends. I know, Amanda, did you have anything that you wanted to share that was surprising?
Oh gosh, so many. I think, just a couple of reflections. I think the thing that comes to my mind is not everyone is meant to be in a leadership role at a higher level. Not everyone is meant to be a director. To Kirby's point, I think about position title versus positionality. And there's this notion, I think, especially in residence life, where you're climbing the ladder, if you're invested in it, is something that is really, really necessary and also problematic, right? Having to put in the amount of years of work or work a particular functional area. I think Res Life asks a lot before you get to ascend. Versus maybe other functional areas. And I'm speaking in broad terms, right? I want to state that very, very clearly. But I think for me, my reflection was, I loved residence life. I am a res lifer at heart, even though that's not the functional area that I'm in anymore, but was in it for a really long time. And I reached this point where I was an associate director and said, I don't want to be a director. What do I do now? Right? So for folks that are in emerging roles, that for folks that are early on in a mid-level versus folks that are coming into student affairs, I think it's similar lessons. when you think about your functional area, you think about your current position title, I think we're often sold on, you have to be sort of at the top of that org chart in order to feel like you've done the good work, you're making the most strategic impact. And I think that's just singularly not true. And for folks that do really good work that are in the middle or that are new and emerging professionals, that is just as important to continue. And you don't have to necessarily ascend to a particular role in order to feel like you're making the most impact in an institution. And I think oftentimes we're sold early on in our careers that, of course, you're tracking towards a director, or of course, you're tracking towards fill in the blank because you should or you can. And I would want folks to just push back against that narrative a little bit. And I think early on, I was surprised that I always thought that's what I wanted because I was being tracked into that. That's what I was told or sold by that functional area. And actually, I didn't want it. As the closer I got to it, that's not what I wanted to do. And I was able to move out of the functional area and use all the same skill sets that I got from residence life to do the work that I'm doing now, which is working with students in distress and in crisis.
So kind of in a similar kind of aspect, what has changed in the last year? So we know with kind of managing a pandemic, our campus environments have been dynamically shifted with students, with new public health restrictions, with being virtual and remote. We all had to navigate new environments in all of our aspects of our work. But specifically, and as you think about the work that you all do in your various positions, or even kind of recruiting for new staff members, what has changed with your work, or even how you go about kind of looking at the work that you do?
I'm trying to think about, oh, go ahead, Christian, go ahead.
No, I was just going to share, I think within the last year, when working in higher education and student affairs, what has changed, I think, was at my institution, it was, I don't want to say the word rigid, but it was kind of like, you are assigned to do this and this is all you can do. And I think with COVID and everything from staffing changes to reorganizations, people had a little bit more fluidity to explore areas within our own unit. And it helped enlighten me what my purpose was. Now, I say that because depending on your institutional size, you may feel restricted that this person is doing this and there are only a few opportunities where I can engage with student care and outreach, with conduct, with professional staff development and engagement. And so within the last year, with all the fluidity that's been happening in terms of staff shortages or the opportunity to explore other areas, it helped me redefine and question what my purpose was, which was like a silver lining.
I think for me, so over the past year, I think we all are aware COVID took a turn on the way we do everything. But additionally, I became a mother this past year, and I think that my mindset shifted, right? I shifted to actually taking care of myself, because if I can't function, how am I expected to keep another child alive and thriving and all that fun stuff? But I would also like to say I became a more intentional professional. The way that I attack my workday, the way that I take care of myself after work, the way that my mindset is when I'm developing students or my student staff, I've thought more clearly about futuristically in regards to what do I want them to receive from either engaging with me, interacting with me, how do I want to show up so that I can allow them to be able to show up as well. I think when it comes to like educating, when it comes to the way that we are approaching how we're developing students, all that stuff is going to need to adapt. So being a lot more flexible, and how times have changed the student, how times have changed how the student is going to learn, and how the whole overall collegiate experience is going to morph into something very different than what we're used to. So I think becoming a little bit more intentional, sitting back more, becoming a little bit more flexible, learning, and letting the student teach me how to best develop them.
I'm trying to figure out where to start with this, because I like when you ask that question, I think like when I continue to reflect on the pandemic that we are still in, let me be very clear that the pandemic isn't over just because we're over it. Wanting to name that the pandemic amplified and either took out of hiding, so to speak, some of the some things that have already existed, right? And so I think for me, things that I have recognized to be challenges or concerns within the field are now more so in my face more than ever, right? And so, and part of that is actually navigating all of that, right? And I think to Ashley's point, what am I choosing to take on? And what are the things that I'm just clearly saying no to, right? And how am I choosing myself, right? I think it's very important for us to acknowledge while this is Careers in Student Affairs Month, there is a mass exodus that is happening within our field for a variety of different reasons, again, that the pandemic has, again, amplified and unearthed, but it's not anything I would say that is new. And people are tired. People are exhausted. People are having moments of where they are realizing and acted upon their self-worth and again, choosing themselves, right? And so when I think about the work that I do and like the teams that I oversee, for me, it's about encouraging them to choose themselves, no matter what other things are on fire surrounding us, right? Because those things were already on fire. We just are now noticing them, right? Or deciding to pay attention to, let's say that, right? And so I think as folks are making decisions or considerations about what a career in student affairs would mean for them, my encouragement for you is to, we like to talk about fit. I hate the word fit, but we deaf to the word fit. I think about you considering like your values, your expectations, your negotiables, your non-negotiables, and where there is alignment between those things. Yep. Thank you, Christian. And know that there are going to be things that don't completely align, and you having to make a decision about what is more important, right? And allowing that to help you navigate and move through this field. Because again, at the end of the day, you want to make sure you're doing what is best for you. And yep, good point, Bree. And so that's definitely been this kind of nebulous space, I would say, that I've been navigating more, but have always brought attention to prior to the pandemic, and hope that this is a conversation that continues to happen and that we move beyond conversation, because I think we've talked it into the ground.
This is a good question. I appreciate all of your thoughts and comments on this. And I think something that has just resonated with me is this idea of balance and boundaries as it thinks about what's changed. Because for the last year and a half, I let people into my houses, right? I let people see like this idea of boundaries with technology. People were calling my cell phone, zooming in to talk to me. I don't know about you all, but when meetings would run over, or you could meet at any time or any day, sometimes as it was relating to some of the work that we needed to get done to respond to some of the things with students. And so boundaries for me had to get readjusted and reflexed, I think, in my role. And this idea of vulnerability that we talk about, as particular, I think we always have it in the spaces we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion and vulnerability. But I think vulnerability never comes up when you talk about the idea of space, and you coming into my personal home to talk to me and for me to work out of my personal space is extremely vulnerable, right? And so me taking the time out of the space that I use to disconnect from work, I think completely amplified this idea of vulnerability for me, even more so than me being a visibly Black woman staff member who has to talk about vulnerability in spaces with all white folks, right? So I thought about like ways that I could protect that space or think critically around what spaces or what times I would be available, and how I would communicate that to my colleagues about when I would have my camera on or when I would be available to Zoom in or work in these flexible environments. And so I think as we impart, or as you impart on thinking about these new expectations of our work being both virtual and in person, it's okay to have those direct conversations about what you need and protecting your space, physical space, as much as you do your emotional space, because I think those are connected, right? And I know there was one point during the pandemic where I felt that I could never just shut off from work because it was always in my kitchen table or like right at where I set up my laptop. And so thinking about that physical space and that vulnerability that we carry with us and everywhere, I think it's very important. And thinking about ways for you that are how you navigate that. And even more so too, as you show up to work, I think now being very mindful of even how I construct my physical space in my office, of having my door closed and communicating how people access me. I think there's a whole new rules and social order I think we've established but not really talked about. And so I think it's important to have better communication about that in those work environments. And so I encourage you all to ask about that culture or establish that culture where you're working or choose to work, because I think that there's an old way of doing things where people could just walk into office or kind of see what you're doing or take up a lot of your space. But now with kind of having a public health environment where space was a health risk, I think now you need that permission and consent to enter spaces and take up space. And I think it's perfectly acceptable and should be encouraged to have that control and management of your own space and your environment in the ways that you need to be successful. And so just kind of putting that out, there's a reflection and a thing that I've learned that I did kind of just as a response to what I was seeing from colleagues and from my environment, just in the way that it used to be and the way that we are now. And so just my thoughts. Thanks, Kirby. I appreciate you saying that. Also wanting to see if there's any questions that you all have, those of you who are joining us in the chat. Don't want to take up all the space with the questions that Christian and I have. Feel free to say them or put them in the chat. I don't know, I was looking at the chat for a little bit, and I know, Bree, you had a question around like the titling of positions and what to look for. I know Kirby was kind of responding. Do you feel like that was adequately addressed?
I have one more thing to add, because I was typing and then I was trying to pay attention at all of these different things because dimes were being dropped. I think additionally to the point around like, as you're searching, right, and trying to consider like Do I want a coordinator position versus an assistant director or so forth, right? I think to my point earlier in the chat, title is going to be nuanced depending on institutional type, scope, the role, pay, classifications, all of that, right? And so if you are looking for a position for the first time, or are you looking to make a transition, what I encourage folks to do is, again, kind of do some inward thinking about what is the type of work that you want to do, right? Like if you think about your day-to-day, what do you want those day-to-day things to be? And look to see, in addition to some other factors of what you need in terms of your wellness, connections on campus, outside of campus, other personal kind of needs and so forth, and see where that aligns with what the position description or overview is going to look like. Some of those things you're going to be able to get verbatim from the PD. Other things are also still going to be nuanced, because we like nuance within student affairs, sometimes to a detriment. And go about asking questions to get clarification around what the expectations are or qualifications of said role. Because again, I think if you, for example, I'll use Michigan State. So we, in our structure, so I'm an assistant director, and then I supervise community directors, and then there's also assistant community directors, as well as residence directors. When we think about the scope of what an assistant community director does here, so we have our assistant community directors directly supervise RAs. If you think about that in comparison to another institution, sometimes that's a full-time job, right? And our assistant community directors here are grads, right? And so when you think about a community director who may supervise the residence directors or our assistant community directors here, like they're managing more people, and that could be equivalent to an assistant director somewhere, right? And so when you think about myself as an assistant director, the work that I do as an assistant director could be potentially compared to an associate director somewhere else, right? And so all of that to say is it's gonna look different, feel different, be different, depending on where you work, right? And again, you just need to make sure you have an understanding of what your expectations and so forth are of the role, but also making sure you're getting what you want out of it, and also that you are getting paid what you want to get paid for the work that you are doing too. Because sometimes folks are being asked to do too much, and then the pay is not equivalent to what is being asked, and all of that. But that's another conversation for another day.
Yes, thank you. That was so great to hear. And yeah, I was just like going down this rabbit hole last night, just looking through a search, really preliminary, because I probably won't be graduating from the HESA program until August. And looking into like jobs that are hiring like right now and need these positions filled versus those that for the next academic year. So that's been another thing I've just been kind of learning to navigate here.
So we have a question in the chat. How do you approach non-negotiables in the job search as a new professional graduating from a higher ed student affairs master's program? I'm always learning for ways to advocate for myself in the professional space. I'm wanting to open that to the panelists for their thoughts.
I can go first. I think, so looking back in life, I did not identify what were my non-negotiables, and I would always say, I'm flexible, I can do whatever I want, or I can do whatever y'all need for me. And what I didn't realize was if we don't sit down to acknowledge what are non-negotiables, we will get it taken advantage of. Not like like people are actively taking advantage of other people, but there are things very sacred to you, right? May that be geographical location, to be close to loved ones and families. Maybe it's salary, because you need to, after doing math, you realize how much you need to pay off student debt if you have student debt. So don't go in there blind and say, like, I don't have non-negotiables, I'll take whatever job. Think about and list, what are your non-negotiables? Maybe geographic, maybe financial, maybe benefits, like dental, health. May that be professional development, how the employer invests in its employees. And what I've come to understand is, either depending on the interview process, right? So things like salary, I'm not going to ask that in my first interview. Absolutely not. I'll ask that like towards when I get my offer letter, right? Negotiate salary. But I do care about professional development. So let's use that for a perfect example. I may ask in an interview, I would love to understand how this institution invests in its employees. What trainings, programs, or certificates do your employees use in your department or get access to? So what I would say is, think about what are your non-negotiables and when can you ask questions around that. Some questions may need to be asked to an HR person that once you receive your offer letter, but once you have identified your non-negotiables, think of ways how you can include that or do research. Maybe the job description itself will tell you exactly what the non-negotiables are, whether that be salary or et cetera.
I think to Christian's point, there's also the time, like I know he brought up time and place. Sometimes the time is in the immediate. And what I mean by that is, how do you not waste your time and then waste the time of anybody that's on the other side of the room, especially when you know that a non-negotiable for yourself is that you need to be making at least $45,000, right? And so you apply to a job that's $39,000, right? Like, unless there are other things that are being taken into consideration that you're making an adjustment or so forth for that non-negotiable. Like, part of that is being able to be up, like, some of it is through that screening process. Some of it is through informational interviewing. I always am an advocate for throughout interview processes, being able to have time with folks outside of the actual interview to be able to have real talk about stuff that's not going to be really polished, that you would typically get within an interview process. To have real talk with Black queer women like myself, to be able to talk about, where can I get my nails done? Where can I get my hair cut? Where is the nearest Target that I can go to? And for them to take all my money, like being able to talk about those things that are sacred, that are important to you, and be able to get an unfiltered like perspective on those things, right? And you can easily ask for those things within those spaces. Like, I always ask, is there an opportunity for me to be able to connect with someone who may identify as X, Y, or Z, to have another conversation, right? With that allows me to get an additional perspective that, again, I wouldn't get within an interview. I think it's also very important to be upfront with, as you are starting to have conversations about negotiations and potentially accepting a job offer, about what you need in a job and how the institution is equipped or not equipped to be able to do that, right? And I say this not to say that like you have to go back on your non-negotiables, but know that whatever is on your non-negotiable list, there may be moments where not everything is going to be checked, and you have to decide which are the things that you are okay with that being like something that you may not get in that time, but potentially can be sought after in another way.
Yeah, I was definitely going to speak on that last part, Kirby, because I think now that I've been on the other side of the table for a little while, I had to like really check my soul a little bit. I think it's important to know that it's not always personal when they say no, right? There are a lot of hard lines that can't be crossed when it comes to recruiting and hiring and HR and all those things, especially, you know, state institutions or certain quotas, like all of those type of information. I would definitely recommend getting creative with what you're looking for and what you're asking for. There are a lot of benefits that are more than just salary. There are a lot of things that you can ask for that could help accommodate in regards to if you are getting a lower salary than you'd like, but there are ways that you can save money in other places by asking for moving expenses or for asking for more professional development, things of that nature. So I definitely would think get creative and don't take it personally. When the no comes around, try to ask, how can I make this work in other ways?
I want to highlight another question that we had in the chat about from Melissa. So what are thoughts or recommendations for someone returning to student affairs after a decade-long stop out while completing a doctorate and raising children? Congratulations on both. Like, both are accolades to be celebrated and like uplifted. That's awesome. So congratulations to you. But wanting to throw it to my group, like, what are thoughts or recommendations that you all have?
Ooh. So currently my partner is in the doctorate program and we have 2 children right now. And I will say it is doable. So I know there's probably a lot of folks being like, wow, that's a lot to do. You can do it. It's been done, and commend you for doing it. I think you have to really look at what student affairs looks like before potentially you left. It probably looks a lot different now coming back. So take a look, ask some colleagues, ask around, look at what different departments have been transitioning into, what the student population looks like. I would think really long and hard about what kind of responsibilities that you'd like to have, kind of that question from before, what kind of work are you looking to do? And then kind of comparing that to what kind of time do you have to give and what left of you do you have to give to the students, and that help that decide which way you can re-enter.
I would absolutely agree with everything Ashley has to say. And there's so much here, right? And what are you looking for and all those good things. But I go to actually a thing that I would recommend to students that are transitioning out of a HESA program, right? What each college and university has gone through, they will say it's unique and different. They will say, you know, the staffing shortages and the budget cuts and the furloughs and the disproportionate impact that the pandemic has had, dual pandemics, the mental health crisis that is being seen as it relates to students' wellness, staff wellness, right? I'll put faculty in there too, but staff wellness. I mean, I would just hope that you would go in with as much information, right? So even this notion of like informational interviews, what was it really like? Like, what am I actually going back into? I think panels and webinars and blogs will they give you that good information. But if you're not still connected and don't have, you know, colleagues that you can call on and say, like, what does this really mean? What am I getting back into day to day, functional area, students, the needs, the elevated expectations or inflated expectations of staff right now? Like, I think that's one of the most basic things, because if I didn't just experience this through the pandemic and through the past 2 years, I don't know that I would believe it all, or I don't know I would know the nuance of it. And every institution is going to be different, right? Big, small, you know, private, public, lots of budget cuts, furloughs, you know, none of that. But what does it really mean for where you want to go back into in that functional area, but even just also the kinds of schools you're looking to enter back into and the kinds of roles. I'd want you to have those kinds of conversations with folks that have been doing it and asking why they continue to do it and what's still been valued for them, why they're continuing to be in the field.
I just want to throw one last cosign on everything that was said. And I think also remember that your path does not need to look like everyone else's. We all have our own journeys and our own experiences, and embrace and celebrate your path and the diversity and identities that you carry. And with what already has been shared with Amanda and Ashley, ask the questions, understand how that path and that experience will look like. But I also want to say that never, I had a friend and colleague who thought they were entering and they were too old for the field. And I'm like, what do you mean you're too old for the field? We have a whole lifetime to do whatever we want, career change and all. So embrace your journey, embrace your path, because any department will be lucky to have you. But absolutely do your homework and understand what environment that will be for you and how it's in alignment with where you are in your life.
Thank you all. Really good thoughts. But being mindful of time, wanting to kind of give it to the group to see if there were any final advice or thoughts that folks want to share for someone who is transitioning or wanting to continue to work in student affairs or higher education. Lasting words, either one word or final mic drop.
I would like to say something. I'm Virgil Pearson. I work at a small HBCU in St. Louis, Missouri. For those new professionals coming into the field, be open. This is a field that you must have a passion for. It doesn't always pay well. You're not always going to get a pat on the back, but your work is not unseen, and you are planting seeds into people's lives that you might not see fruition for years. But through their journey through life, people are going to water it, and at some point it's going to grow. But remember that you are a seed planter in people's lives, and it's a great feeling to see people 5 to 10 years down the line who have transformed based off what you've deposited into them. So be open, be courageous. If you have the tenacity, the resilience to do this, go for it. And don't remember, always fill your cup up, because you can't pour from an empty cup. And so begin to create those boundaries early in your career, personally and professionally. That was with family, with friends, and also colleagues and students. And just make sure you take care of yourself as you move forward in this career.
Thanks for sharing that.
I think that's it. Thank you, Virgil. I mean, Kirby, yeah, go for it. I was gonna say thank you. That's so wonderful.
Oh, Kirby, I think you're muted.
I'll drop one small nugget as Kirby is unmuting. Know your worth and your value, because if you don't acknowledge your worth and your value, how do you expect other people to? It took me a very long time to understand that, but as you're job searching, understand what you can offer, understand your I'm a spiritual person, so you're like your God-given talent, and acknowledge your worth and value so others can too.
Can y'all hear me now? Okay, there we go. My team, the Zoom is doing the most. I want to leave you with this quote that I stumbled across on Instagram the other day. It says, "Your boundary need not always be an angry electric fence that shocks those who touch it. It can be a consistent light around you that announces, I will be treated sacredly." And so as you continue to think about where you want to be in the spaces in which you want to occupy, you want to be able to do so in which you are going to be treated sacredly. And sometimes that may mean saying no to things that are not going to uphold you as sacred. And so encourage you all to think about that in all avenues of your life.
Thank you. And with that, thank you for your time, and hope you all have a great rest of your day.
Thank you for the insight. Bye.